Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thanks for joining us here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So tonight we have a special guest, Ajahn Pasanno, who is visiting us from Abhayagiri Monastery in California. And we're very happy and delighted to have Ajahn Pasanno here to share his time as well as words of wisdom, words of Dhamma with us. So this evening, Ajahn Pasanno will be sharing a little bit about the 5 Khandhas. But before that, we'll have some guided meditation. And good evening so far to Geeta, Fred, Ron, Adine, Mike, Aya Vimalanyani, good to see you, Venerable, as well as Jens, Kumu, and Ishan. So thanks everyone for joining us. And at this time, I'll pass things over to Ajahn Pasanno for the guided meditation.
Okay, so welcome everybody. We'll take this opportunity to sit quietly, settle the mind. Just using the time to direct attention to our body, paying attention to posture. Not that it has to be any particular posture, but that we bring mindfulness to the posture, or if we're particularly with sitting, it's helpful to be upright, bringing a bit of energy, but not getting too tense, tight, just relaxing into a posture of alertness. I'd say, of course, alertness is a mental quality, but the posture that we take helps to facilitate that or to encourage that. So just sitting with an upright posture, nice and balanced, not leaning forward too much, not leaning back, not leaning to the right or left, just a comfortable, alert presence. And giving attention to the rhythm of the breath, just being present with the breath as it comes into the body, as it leaves the body, and you can attend to tip of the nose, back of the throat, chest, abdomen. And that's not so important. What's important is that there is a recognition of the breath coming in, the breath going out. Particularly as we begin just settling into a smooth, comfortable, relaxed rhythm of awareness and alertness as we breathe in, as we breathe out. There's no real need to try too quickly to focus attention in too narrow a way. And just let that attention and awareness be kind of broad, alert, present. As we breathe in, as we breathe out. And that allows for a kind of a clearing out of the mind. I mean, we're always putting stuff in, but we forget to take it out. And so that just letting that rhythm of the breath, the continuity of attention, breathing in awareness and alertness, and then just releasing with the out breath any particular moods, obsessions, proliferations, and allow the mind just to be clear. There's a steadiness that starts to manifest as we attend to that alertness, awareness, that attention. As we settle, the mind can be, if it is alert and present and say, awake or bright, you can let that incline to stillness, or one can sometimes lift up a theme of reflection or contemplation. So we have many, many options in meditation, but it's good to lay the foundation and the base of awareness, alertness, and a clarity. So we can just take this period of time and just turn attention to that settling and stilling.
Well, thank you, Ajahn Pasanno, for sharing that guided meditation with us. And good evening to some more friends joining in. Hello to Melinda, Angela, Tran, Thomas, Melissa, Felipe, as well as Elaine and Vortex. So glad to see everyone joining in, as well as several people who are just viewing right now. So this evening, Ajahn will be sharing some words of Dhamma with us, and feel free to type in questions at any time for the short Q&A that we'll have after the talk. But at this time, I'll pass things over to Ajahn Pasanno for this evening's Dhamma talk.
Okay, I'll begin by paying homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So greetings everyone. The topic that was suggested this evening for me to speak about is the components of experience, the 5 khandhas, aggregates of being, and how to use them for reflection in our practice, in our meditation. And perhaps it might be helpful to say a couple words about reflection, that it is, it is a part of meditation. There are many teachings that people hear and meditation retreats and sometimes reflection is not really given much attention. But in the say in the classical teachings, that is a fundamental aspect of the development of our both calm as well as insight, and in learning how to direct attention toward a reflection, because there are certain reflections, contemplations that help to brighten the mind, that help to clarify points of Dhamma, or create a sense of urgency, so that there's a whole variety of purposes for using contemplation. And certainly in the second factor of the 7 factors of awakening, of enlightenment, is Dhamma Vicaya, the investigation of Dhamma. So being able to pick up a theme of contemplation is very much a part of the training of the mind. And to contemplate the 5 khandhas, these 5 aggregates of being, these components of our experience, it's actually, it's like the in terms of recorded teachings of the Buddha, that is the second recording teaching, and the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, which is teachings on not self, but then using through the lens of these 5 khandhas to be able to contemplate, investigate our experience and lead us to a place of relinquishment, letting go, release. So it's seeing these 5 khandhas, and khandhas is it's a pretty, even in the scriptural language, it's a pretty pedestrian term. Heaps, lumps. it's I mean, it's so that it's just a collection. It's a useful way of dividing our experience in the human condition through a subjective lens. I mean, because we are, say, the basis of our experience, and these 5 khandhas. First one is form, physical form. Second is feeling, and feeling in terms of just basic pleasant, unpleasant, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, or a neutral feeling. Perception, so the being able to remember, to be able to label, to give a kind of value or importance to something. It's that recognition. Oh, this is useful. This is not useful, or this is something that I have to be careful of. It's but on a fundamental level, and of course it's working through memory. So perception is being able to just perceive the characteristics of things and recognize because of our experience. The next one is say sankhara, which is a mental formations, and those are basically all the thinking, thoughts, moods, emotion of the mind, both skillful and unskillful. Anger is a mental formation. Loving kindness is a mental formation. Mindfulness is a mental formation. So wisdom is a mental formation. Greed is a mental formation. So it's that just the movement of the mind, the constructs of the mind that we experience as both thought and emotion. And the last is vijnana, which is sense consciousness, just being able to perceive the senses and then to pull our experience together from these different elements. So, but these are, as I say, components of experience, and to be able to look at it through, and that's the purpose of, say, like the reflection or contemplation, is to see it as experience as opposed to this is me, this is mine, this is what I am. Because we make that, generally, that's what we make that leap from basic experience into all of a sudden, it's all about me. and me and myself and trying to either prop up something or trying to get rid of something, and so it didn't take very long to get really complicated. And that's a really helpful tool in terms of reflection, because as our mind starts to move and spin out stories and create all sorts of kind of they're stories really, because we all love a good story, but to be able to step back and say, oh, what am I actually experiencing here? Well, experiencing the body, feeling of different tonality, there's perception and memory, there's various thoughts and emotion, and there's the consciousness of the various senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, mental objects. And so that helps to, okay, let's slow this down, look at it a bit more carefully. And the Buddha is always trying to get us to look in terms of, not in terms of, is this right or wrong? Is it good or bad? But is it useful or not useful? Is it beneficial or not beneficial? Is it skillful or unskillful? Is it wholesome or unwholesome? In Pali, the kusala and akusala qualities are it's really important, because we're looking at it in terms of a continuum of how it affects us, and then realizing or recognizing that there are ways that we can direct our attention and cultivate an understanding that allows us to experience a continuity of what is truly skillful, beneficial, wholesome. And that lays a foundation for realization, and particularly relinquishment, a letting go. And that is there's a short phrase that comes up in the Buddha's teaching in a few places, and when the Buddha is asked to give a teaching in brief, and when he said nothing whatsoever should be clung to, or all things, sabbe dhamma nalang abhinivesaya, all things are not worthy of clinging, adhering to. So that doesn't mean that we're just trying to annihilate or push away anything, but it's when we review and reflect on our experience and see, oh, what we're reacting to out of liking and disliking, wanting and not wanting, approving, disapproving, is just body, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. And whether we're reacting to what we call the world out there or our own perception of ourselves, it is all just body, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. And that it simplifies things and brings it back to something quite fundamental. And because that's the Buddha gives a very stark image of just as if a dog is tied to a leash to a post. It's in the ground. That dog, what it does is wanders around in circles in whatever direction it wanders around that post. And the same way, however we conceive of a self, what we do is wander around body, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, just these five khandhas, these five components of experience. And whether we create, say, an exalted self, or whether we create a diminished self, or whether we worried about what kind of self we do have, it is just body, feeling. So that's the essence of the understanding not self is not some kind of philosophical, doctrinal, oh, I believe in not self. It's more looking at experience and recognizing that these elements of that we pull together and conjure up a sense of self, a sense of I am, are these fundamental experiences. And we can observe them, we can understand them, we can clarify them, and we can contemplate kind of relinquishment, contemplate a letting go. It's like Ajahn Chah, one of his well-known teachings, saying, and he was a master at simplifying things, saying, Dhamma practice is not difficult. There's only two things you need to do: know and let go. And of course, it's very easy to say, but and it has many nuances. But coming back to that sense of, oh yeah, just knowing clearly, letting go, relinquishing, releasing, having a sense of dispassion and disenchantment toward these elements of experience. And also an aspect of reflecting on these five components of experience. One starts to recognize the universality of it, and that sense of that everything that we experience is filtered through the lens of these five khandhas, but that's the same for everybody. And when we pick that up and reflect on it and recognize how, how universal, how pervasive that is, it's not just an intellectual analysis that takes us to some kind of insight. I mean, it does. But when we explore it, one of the other elements is that arises is also compassion, because form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. I mean, it can get, just observing ourselves, one can recognize very clearly how entangled and complicated and fraught with difficulty it can be. And everybody else is exactly the same. And nobody wants to suffer. Nobody wants to experience difficulty. But here we are in this human condition, and that sense of compassion, having a sense of empathizing and recognizing that we all share this characteristic, and definitely is worthy of compassion. And even I remember years ago being a translator for a senior Thai monk who was he was an accomplished and well-known, respected teacher, and he would always begin his Dhamma talks addressing the audience as kind of fellow sufferers in birth, aging, sickness, and death. And it was a really beautiful way of addressing an audience and just looking at everybody. And he was somebody who had a huge following, and he would go on radio and television all the time. But that and teachings at his monastery was every Sunday at his monastery. It was a huge gathering, but you just welcome all of the fellow sufferers in birth, aging, sickness, and death, and that's a reality, and that is the basis of our suffering. It's the basis of our liberation as well. Body, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. That is where the basis of our suffering, it's the basis of our clinging, it's the basis of our delusions and misperceptions of the world. It's also the opportunity, or certainly a key to how we can free the heart. And so that being able to just seeing it in its true nature. There's a particular discourse that I like anyway, and where it's a discussion between two monks, Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahakotita. And Mahakotita asks Sariputta, what is it that, say, an ordinary, unenlightened, run-of-the-mill being needs to contemplate or understand or practice with in order to enter the stream of Dhamma? And Sariputta responds that in order to, for an ordinary person to have that understanding, they need to contemplate physical form as impermanent, changing, uncertain, unstable, as fraught with difficulty, suffering, unsatisfactory, as an alien, other, not self. So just seeing that anicca, dukkha, anatta, and if one contemplates in that way, one would surely enter the stream of Dhamma. And then Mahakotita then asks, well, what does a stream enterer do? And what would they practice with in order to further their understanding and to the next level of awakening, which would be a once returner. Sariputta, well, a stream enterer would contemplate form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness as impermanent, changing, unstable, the whole thing again, and through to not self. And if they did that, they would certainly realize once returning. And then, of course, it goes on. What would a once returner do in order to see the next level of awakening? A non-returning anagami. And of course, it says exactly the same thing. Sariputta lays it out in that same way. And then Mahakotita, again, so what would a non-returner do to realize arahantship? And then Sariputta goes through it all again and said, this is what a non-returner do in order to realize arahantship. And he said, well, what would an arahant contemplate? And he said, lays it exactly the same. An arahant would contemplate the form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, in all those ways of impermanent, changing, unstable, unsatisfactory, suffering, and sort of non-self. He said, not because there is anything further to do, but for a pleasant abiding here and now, and delight in Dhamma. It's it's like a very beautiful sutta, and of course it brings it back to the basics, the foundations for all of us, and then using these components of experience, so that the practice is really here in our experience. It's not out there. It's not in some special practice that one has to do out there somewhere else, or something that is overly intellectualized or philosophized or idealized. It is in these fundamentals, the components of our experience. There was Ajahn Pasanno tells a story of one time accompanying Ajahn Chah and one other senior disciple of Ajahn Chah's. They went and paid respects to the various living meditation masters in the Ajahn Mun tradition. And they went and visited one of the old monks, Lumpur Kao, who was considered to be an arahant and was well loved, well respected everywhere. And then they went and paid respects, and by that time, Lumpur Kao was quite old, and he, as like many of the people of the northeast of Thailand, they chewed betel nut, so he's chewing betel nut, talking Dhamma to Ajahn Chah and this other monk, and very, very down home Lao dialect that's common in that region. And Ajahn Sumedho said he didn't understand a word. It was like, didn't understand anything. And he was watching Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Mahamon, the other senior monk, and they're kind of engaging and enjoying this back and forth. And anyway, they paid respects, and they're leaving. And Ajahn Sumedho was a bit disappointed because it was obviously Ajahn Chah was incredibly respectful to him, and he'd heard of his renown, and he said, I didn't understand anything. And so then Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Mahamon, they got up, they're leaving, and Ajahn Sumedho was getting up to leave, and then this old monk, he was just getting to the door, and he kind of leaped up. He's quite old. He got up really quickly, and then he came right up to him, and he said, "It's right here. It's right here. Just this." So like it's all in our experience. It's all in this body and this mind. So these 5 components of experience, just bringing it back to that knowing, understanding, and being ready to relinquish and let go. So I'll offer that for reflection this evening.
Hadabayang Dhammakataya Sadhukarang Dadamase
Sadhu, 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 anumodami. So much gratitude to Ajahn for sharing those words of Dhamma and reflections with us. And good evening to all those who joined in as well since then. And at this time, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in and I will read them out. And so far we have just a couple. So we have one question from Jessie who says, thank you, Ajahn. It's my experience that is my experience still through the Khandhas if I'm not clinging to them? Or is it that when I'm not clinging to them, that Buddha or pure awareness is present?
Yeah, no, it's through the Khandhas. That is, there's, the Buddha differentiates between the Khandhas and the Upadana Khandhas. So that the the Khandhas subject to clinging. So that it's when it's subject to clinging, then it's problematic. That's the basis of suffering and dukkha and all of its complications. But even for an arahant, fully awakened, relinquishing all clinging, all upadana, all attachment, as long as they're alive, those 5 khandhas are there, and still got a body, still got feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Of course, it's a very different experience because it's not conducive to suffering, or it's not conducive to creating complications, difficulty. But one still, of course, the Buddha is always the best example. So he's fully awakened under the Bodhi tree when he's 35 years old. He continues to live and teach till he's 80. And so all that time, he is relying, dependent, his life force is relying, dependent on those five khandhas, five aggregates of being. But it's not creating suffering, which doesn't mean he didn't experience old age or sickness or death. I mean, that's just a part of the rupa khandha, the physical body. And in the suttas, and one sees that the Buddha went through periods, especially in his older life, where he had both, kind of like an ailment that left him depleted and tired, and then also where he experienced back pain and would sometimes have to. I think there's several discourses where the Buddha asked, he's teaching, and he said, he was turning to Sariputta or to Mahamoggallana and thing. The assembly is bright and attentive. My back is aching. Please take over give some teachings, and I'll go and lie down. I just need a break from sitting because of the experience of dukkha. I mean, he could, and the Buddha actually says his body is like this drum that's been patched over time, and until parts of the original drum, the drum's still there. All the original parts are gone. It's been replaced by all sorts of others, or like an old cart that is kind of trundling along, not very smoothly, and he could. It's just the way it is with an aging body, and he said he's not really comfortable unless he goes into very deep samadhi. But that's the nature of the body. So that feeling, there's painful feeling, pleasant feeling, neither painful nor pleasant. Memory. I mean, you think of like, well, memory, perception, mental formations. From the time the Buddha started teaching to the time he passed away, think of all of those beautiful similes that the Buddha gave come from feeling, perception, mental formation, consciousness. The mind is definitely functioning, but there's a level of clarity and non-delusion that is fundamental. And of course, that's what the Buddha says is accessible to all of us as we practice, train, and reflect according to Dhamma. Sort of the Dhamma no Dhamma Patibhata, practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma is a critical kind of piece of or an aspect of the Buddhist teaching that is very important. So it's just lifting up these themes of Dhamma to be able to see things in their true nature. And then fundamentally, this body, this mind, and being able to see that clearly.
And Jill asks if specifically you remember which sutta you were referring to with Sariputta and
Mahakotita. It is called Silavan Sutta, and it is toward the end of the Khandha Samyutta. So Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses, Samyutta 22. The number I can't remember, but it's way toward the end.
And Jill also asks, does consciousness arise dependent on form?
Well, yes. I mean, in the sense that is these are all, they're all linked together. I mean, of course there are, say, exceptions to that in the sense of the say the higher Brahma realms. Those are beings of say of pure mentality, but if we're talking about us practicing body, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness.
And Angela asks, how long is Ajahn staying with us at Empty Cloud? And Ajahn Pasanno is staying with us for a couple of days, actually. So for those of you watching online, you can join the talks. But if you're around on Sunday all day, we'll be having Vesak, celebrating the Buddha's birthday, enlightenment, and passing away. And Ajahn Pasanno will be our guest teacher and speaker that day. So please come if you can. You can find more information on our website. And Mark asks, are awareness and consciousness synonymous in the Buddhist view?
I would say no. And of course, being, there's going to be any number of contradictions to that in the sense of, because it's also how you define things. But certainly awareness in terms of sati, mindfulness, is very clearly pointed to as a mental formation. So sankhara khanda. Vijnana is of it's a bit more global or a bit more fundamental. So the knowing of the consciousness of the sense bases, and then and of course, as that kind of stitches together experience as well. So it's a consciousness, and so it depends how one is defining terms. But there is a difference between, say, like sati, vijnana. And vijnana is to be known. Sati is to be cultivated.
And Evan has a question. When trying to increase time spent to practice, I've encountered resistance, stiffness, and numbness of mind. What does that reveal about my experience of the Khandhas?
It reveals that you're normal. Yeah, I mean, we all go through that, and we all, as soon as you start questioning human experience and questioning ourselves, then yeah, there's going to be resistance, and that, and then there's going to be times when one's really kind of inspired and fired up, and it all makes sense. And there's going to be times when, like, what the heck am I doing here? So it's to be able to recognize that those are cycles that come and go. It's quite normal, quite ordinary. But then it's also just being able to recognize the sometimes we'll idealize that, you know, if I were really practicing properly, then I wouldn't have any difficulties or problems, or I wouldn't experience any setbacks. And well, no, not really. I mean, it's there's always going to be something, if not internally or, you know, externally. So that's that sense of willingness to pick up and investigate our experience, and particularly investigating from a place of the Four Noble Truths. This is discontent, dissatisfaction, difficulty. What's the cause? What's the end? Where is the ending of this? What is the path leading to its ending? And so that's different, holding it differently, but in a very practical way. So then it gives an element of like a different perspective that allows us to work with it skillfully.
And I also want to give an opportunity for our in-person audience to ask questions as well.
So, excuse me. So, when you were to contemplate the Khandhas, there's that whole rubrics of things to contemplate. But would you do that systematically through each of the Khandhas, like focusing first on the body and then on feelings, like maybe one meditation session devoted to one at a time, or just kind of as things are arising, or how would one investigate?
Well, I would like to be able to say that I'm very systematic and ordered, but I'm not. But I think one of it to me, what it does is by lifting it up as a contemplation, it helps to create a certain order in the mind that one can then follow through and investigate experience from and contemplate it from the perspective of Dhamma. That's what, say, like Dhamma Pasanno, Satipatthana. So there's a foundation of mindfulness that's based on Dhamma or the mental phenomena. So there are various structures that the Buddha gives. I mean, 5 hindrances, 5 khandhas, 6 sense bases, 7 factors of waking, 4 noble truths. So that those are structures that help us to keep a certain order, coalescing or reminding ourselves to reflect in that way. So then, by doing that, then we create more clarity, and then so it feeds itself back and forth. So then you can also lift it up, but I wouldn't think that you have to force yourself to be really, consistently structured and ordered, but it's more like these are helpful tools. These are all tools. Now, all of the Satipatthana, all of the different approaches to practice, those are all tools that we have to develop skill at using, and then recognizing how they affect us, so that somebody could, because there's a very very different contemplation. Say like you say like the development of loving kindness. I mean, the Buddha says to use it as a means of countering aversion and ill will, and to develop the mind of loving kindness, and then say that concentration based on loving kindness is as exalted, as praised, and for many years for myself, I'm like turning it like, okay, I've got to develop loving kindness, and the first thing to come up is ill will, and just irritation, and so, but that doesn't mean I didn't learn anything. And and similarly with the khandhas, I mean, sometimes we bring it up, and what might come up is doubt or confusion. But we have to pay attention. Well, what is the mind? How is it picking it up? And how can I work with this? And what's it telling me about my mind? Or even the five hindrances. Those are really good recollections, because oftentimes there's you pay attention to the five hindrances so you can cultivate the things that counter it, but also you can really learn a lot of what kind of suffering and dissatisfaction does my mind gravitate to. Sense, desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, doubt. Those are manifestations of suffering. And they're shining a light on particular habits of mind. And so one can really learn about them. So that the five khandhas are similar, along with basically all the various teachings. Those are tools that we can learn how to be proficient with. And whenever we learn or use a new tool, I mean, sometimes we can, you get this brand new hammer that you're really proud of, and you smash your thumb on it. But when you learn how to use it, you can accomplish quite a lot. So certainly with the teachings around the five khandhas, those the Buddha gives a special place of. It's a doorway into anatta, which is such a fundamental basis of the Buddha's awakening and insight.
So you work at with them as a whole unit, or just as it arises? What arises in your experience?
Yeah, I would. Well, one is just to use it in terms of what am I experiencing, how am I experiencing it, and then looking at both the arising and the ceasing, or its presence. And so then it's you've got a range, but then it's also paying attention. Well, what does that elicit? What arises within the mind? What kind of mood arises? Okay.
Well, we have one more question online from Vortex, who says, Ajahn, I've always wondered why in the Four Noble Truths the path to cessation is listed last rather than third. There is cessation, but not without the path to cessation. So why are they listed in that way?
Well, I think in terms of the they're put in terms of cause and effect, so that suffering is the cause, or say it the other way around. Say the effect is suffering, cause is that, and then the cause of the cessation is the path. Effect is cessation. So it's put in that cause and effect relationship. And because also in terms, yes, especially on a more refined level, there does need to be a confidence in cessation of suffering in order to commit to that practice or that training, even on a, say, on a little degree, on a tiny degree. There needs to be a sort of, yeah, I really do want to experience cessation of dukkha, of suffering, and that path is in okay, that's what I need to do. So that's that relationship of cause and effect.
Well, that was the last question of the evening online.
Yeah. So.
I had a clarifying question about kind of indirect experience, distinguishing kind of objects of body consciousness and then emotions, for example, because very often when I'm having an emotion, I'll actually feel it in the space of my body.
Yeah.
And so how do we distinguish that experience of form versus the emotion, which I assume is samkhara? And it could be also an unpleasant emotion, so that's Vedana. So
Yeah.
how do we disambiguate all of this?
I wouldn't. I mean, the Buddha is very clear. It might be. I think it's the Buddha. It might be somebody. Might be Sariputta. In the sense of, but there's that. These 5 khandhas are conjoined. They are not disjoined. So that it all. Yes, I mean they are talked about separately because that's what language does. It separates, but it's for a purpose of, giving different angles of reflecting or paying attention, so that one gets a better. Because if it's just some sort of global, well, there's this thing called body-mind, it's a bit too amorphous and nebulous. But in a fundamental way, the Buddha breaks it down into these 5 aggregates of being, components of experience that allow us to contemplate it. But they're always seen as, say, as conjoined and not disjoined. So they're all going. You're going to experience it all together. Yeah, and you don't have to worry about separating it all out, making it a discrete experience.
Ajahn, I
Yes.
was wondering if, even though we're not supposed to subdivide the experience, or you're encouraging us to somewhat have take it as a whole. I realized in my practice, for example, that certain meditation practices gave me shifted my perception from an intellectual understanding, for example, of form, to an experiential understanding of form. So perhaps, like, for example, the 4 elements meditation has been very helpful in that regard. But in terms of the 5 aggregates, perception, I feel like I haven't made much progress in the way that I understand it, but I don't understand.
Right.
So I was wondering if perhaps you could share some advice or some pointers on how to approach shift from an intellectual understanding of perception to an experiential understanding.
Well, I think that's where it's really helpful to keep coming back to the body, where the body is the again. Because it's a body, then there is some kind of gravity. There's gravity to it, and you've got these 4 elements, and they're solid, somewhat, And so that one experiences them. And then, of course, within that body experience or somatic experience, there's going to be a whole wash of feelings and perceptions and emotion and images and moods and whatnot. And but having the body to be a kind of a vehicle or a space that it can be held, so that it doesn't just spin out into sort of an inchoate confusion, but has an anchor. Then we can start to pay attention to the experience of those different elements, which are they're mental events, but they leave an impression on the body, and we can begin to establish a sense of, say, of ease, of calming, of settling, of clarity, that is kind of like a mirror to the mind. And so something like perception is both say, memory, that's one of the functions of memory, but it's also association. And then, so then, of course, and sometimes it's just so quick. But when we've got say, an anchor using the mindfulness of the body and a kind of a body presence, then that experience of association or imagery, labeling of experience or labeling, then that it's a bit more tangible and allows us to see it more clearly and see through it a bit more clearly. Okay. Okay.
All right. So thank you, Ajahn, for sharing your time with us this evening, and thanks for everyone for joining in. You can return tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. New York City time for another Dharma talk from Ajahn Pasanno, as well as in the evening at 7:30 p.m. But for tonight, we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And enjoy the rest of your night.